Time's River by Jim Lee. Chapter 6. The Mermaid. Christina. Dismayed by the blood on my hand, I knelt by the edge in the sand, hoping to wash, then, the stain from my skin. When under the water I saw a vision which filled me with awe, a terror which did cold shivers begin. Its eyes black as coal did appear, and its mouth a terrible leer, and hands curled into claws down by its side. So fearsome this creature did seem, and did menace radiant gleam, that at once my instinct bellowed to hide. Nearby a sound broke through the strand, and surfacing there, close at hand, was a maid of the deep, both pale but fair. Azure scales to flaxen tresses, child of the sea's soft caresses, it soothed my heart to see her swimming there. Pray thee, tell me, sweet golden maid, what cruel game has fate here played, that yon beast shares this stream with one so true? It dwells not here, O foolish man, for such as that one never can, for see, 'tis but the reflection of you. On Sunday, the little group of worshippers at the church prayed for me that I might be healed. Whether they together wielded some power, or whether the malady was merely a temporary one whose duration was unknown to me, it hardly mattered. I did not wake on Sunday evening, but slept, so either I was returning home or becoming lost further from it. So weary was I, though, I no longer cared which it might be. I became aware, as I slept, that my dreaming feet were walking down a well-worn path. In the clearing ahead lay the artifice of my machine. The bright shining controls gleamed with distorted reflections of myself in their chromed surfaces. I approached it cautiously, as one might approach a piece of farm equipment to which they have previously lost a limb. In one mirrored plane, I saw my eyes, irises returned to normal. I turned my back on the thing and began to walk out of the clearing. The surrounding environs seemed to coalesce as I strode forward. The grass through which I found myself walking was tall, lush, and verdant. The blades were soft and smooth as they brushed across my chest, my swinging hands, and my bare feet. They were cool and smelled, tasted faintly of apples. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the soft gurgling of a small waterfall. The sun shone warmly on my face, and I just felt, I want to stay here. The ground was sloping gently up to a hilltop ahead. I pressed on, and the golden warmth pouring down upon me intensified. As I breasted the hill, I found myself looking across a wide, shallow valley. The entirety of the valley was filled with this same tall, springy grass, save for a glistening ribbon of blue water coursing across its middle at the bottom. I felt so peaceful. The desire to stay was overpowering. I had been in turmoil for so long, I couldn't, at that moment, remember having ever been relaxed, and the desire to simply let everything go and remain here in this place of bliss became all-consuming. I first sat down and then lay back with my hands clasped behind my head, the springy grass pressing outward in a wide fan to support me. The sunlight was warm and soothing. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the waterfall and sighed and drifted away. I became aware, as I slept, that my dreaming feet were walking down a well-worn path. In the clearing ahead lay the artifice of my machine. The bright shining controls gleamed with distorted reflections of myself in their chrome surfaces. A ray of light bounced off of one mirror plane as I approached it cautiously, as one might approach a piece of farm equipment to which they have previously lost a limb. And as I expected, I saw my eyes, the irises returned to normal. Had I seen this before? I turned my back on the thing and began to walk out of the clearing. The surrounding environs seemed to coalesce as I strode forward. The grass through which I found myself walking was tall, lush, and verdant, but I seemed to be following another well-worn path. The blades of grass to either side of the path were soft and smooth. I stretched out my arms to feel them as they brushed my fingers. They were cool and tasted faintly of apples. Somewhere nearby I could hear the soft gurgling of a small waterfall. The sun shone warmly on my face, and I just felt, I want to stay here. With this thought came a growing feeling of déjà vu. The ground was sloping gently up to a hilltop ahead. I pressed on, and the golden warmth pouring down upon me intensified. As I breasted the hill, the path seemed to disperse in all directions and become indistinct, and I found myself looking across a wide, shallow valley. The entirety of the valley was filled with this same tall, springy grass, save for a glistening ribbon of blue water coursing across its middle at the bottom, and scattered everywhere across the valley were tiny depressions, circles where the natural shape of the grass was disturbed. I felt so peaceful. The desire to stay was overpowering. I had been in turmoil for so long, I couldn't, at that moment, remember having ever been relaxed. And the desire to simply let everything go and remain here, in this place of bliss, became all-consuming. The feeling of vague recollection, of familiarity, only added to the appeal. This felt like home. I walked to an area of fresh, springy grass and began to stoop, preparing to sit down so I could lie back and enjoy the warm sun, when in the distance I heard a faint sound. It was the sound of a baby crying. I straightened up and tried to listen where the sound was coming from. It was faint, but seemed to be coming from one of the nearby circular depressions in the grass. I walked in that direction and noticed that the grass was stiffer now, resisting me slightly as I passed through it. It took only a minute to reach the closest circle. As I did so, the gentle breeze which had been blowing shifted direction, and now the sound seemed to be coming from somewhere off to the left. In that direction lay another of these depressions, but in the one in which I stood lay what I first took for a large boulder. My vision blurred, and I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the boulder had changed, elongated, and lighter in hue, yet still blurry. I rubbed my eyes again. Before me lay a boy, sleeping. The wail of the child grew louder for a moment, and the sleeper stirred in his slumber and rolled away from the sound toward me. An icy shiver coursed up my spine as I realized it was my face I was staring into. The sleeping face distorted in agitation for a moment, then went slack again as the crying sound dropped again. Looking around, I saw that the apparent source of the sound was indeed coming from the closest indentation in the grass. I headed in that direction and pushed my way through the thick grass, which had not been this difficult to traverse before. Soon I breached the circle and found another boy, another sleeper, another me. Again, though, my ears had been deceived as the sound of the source shifted again, now off to my right. The sound grew much louder for a moment, and I recognized it. It was the sound of little Sprout Lucas, wailing in terror while his family tried to escape the burning death trap of their home. The sleeper at my feet let out a little inchoate, wordless moan. Around me, from all directions, all across the Green Valley Drive, there were echoes, perfect copies of that moan. Every circle of flattened grass then contained another me, another dreamer. I scanned the valley with my eyes and tried to count the depressions. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands. All me? This was insanity. The child's cries continued. I was loath to continue a wild goose chase, but there seemed to be nothing else I could do. I tried to run in that direction, but immediately found myself barred from making any rapid progress. The formerly springy turf had become stiff and rigid. I swept my left foot across in front of me, pushing a fan of stalks down, then stomped at the base of the bundle with my right foot, crunching them flat. When I swept the right foot across in the same fashion, the crushed blades did not rise back up. I progressed slowly in the direction of the sprout's feeble protestations. Such progress was arduous, and I flailed my arms as I tottered back and forth. At one point, my right hand swept through the erect grass beyond the width of my little path, and I felt a sharp slice of pain. I pulled my hand away and looked at it. A single, thin, red line crossed all my fingers at an angle, like a massive paper cut. I continued on, being mindful to keep my hands away from the grass. The sun passed first behind light, fluffy-looking cumulonimbus clouds. These were replaced, as I struggled on, with ever darker and larger kin. The light breeze began to wax in intensity, and soon a brisk wind was whipping at my hair and pajamas. It took, I would guess, about an hour to reach the next circle, but as I said, I really had nothing better I could do. When I crunched my way into the eye of my target, I saw two things. First, there was no sleeper here, and second, where I would expect the sleeper, there was a wide hole in the ground. As I watched, a small white rabbit scurried out of the turf wall across from me and darted toward the hole. He stopped at the edge and, looking at me, said, "Okay, it's a little heavy-handed. What of it?" Then he jumped into the hole. I walked to its edge and looked down. The sound was coming from below, and a metallic surface curved and sloped steeply away into darkness. Looking around at the valley, I saw nothing but circles in the grass. The wind had quickened into a gale, and the sky had grown dark, choked with ominous, storm-threatening clouds. I heard the sound of metal scraping metal behind me, and turned to see the grass in the path behind me spring upright. I walked back to it and tested sweeping my bare foot across it, but yelped with pain as the first blade of grass cut into the side of my foot, now truly blades of grass. I had no choice. I sat on the edge of the hole and slid down. The slide spiraled down into total darkness. Images danced through my mind of what might be waiting at its end. I envisioned a vast gaping maw stretched wide to admit the plummeting rabbit, and now waiting for the main course. I tried futilely to press against the surface, to slow my progress, but nothing I did seemed to make any difference. After an unknown time, I saw dim, diffuse light below and before me, reflected in the metallic surface of the slide, and suddenly I emerged into the full light of a cool afternoon. I was sitting at the end of a short, enclosed child's slide on a playground. The slide I was looking at extended no more than 8 feet up, and the entrance was clearly visible. A younger girl, perhaps 8 or 9, shooed her hand at me, clearly wanting me to get out of the way so she could take her turn. I stepped off the slide. The sound I had followed here was coming from nearby. An elderly woman, perhaps in her 70s, wearing a conical birthday hat affixed to her head with a flimsy elastic band, sat on some steps in front of a house. She sat with a cassette tape recorder in her lap, and the wailing sound was emanating from this. She looked at me and thumbed the stop button and mumbled something. It may have been, "Took you long enough." Nearby, some other children were walking in a circle around some chairs. As she thumbed the button, they scrambled, each trying to find a seat. After a flurry of activity, a short, heavy-set boy of perhaps 8, as well, was left standing without a chair. He looked downcast and may have been about to cry when a familiar girl's voice called out to him, "It's okay, Michael. That just means you get to have your cake first. Just don't eat it all before I finish the game." The boy's face brightened, and he pelted away to a picnic table nearby, decked out in a brightly colored tablecloth, where a middle-aged woman in perhaps her mid to late 40s was carving into a massive cake with a large plastic cake knife. I turned to the familiar voice, and my heart leaped in my chest. The old woman thumbed the play button on the tape recorder, and some jaunty tune began to play from the tiny speaker. In retrospect, I think it was a version of Pop Goes the Weasel. And as the music began to play, Mandy stood up from one of the chairs and began to march in a circle around the now reduced cluster of remaining chairs. I ran toward her with tears of joy flowing out of my eyes, arms flung wide. and passed right through her. "She can't see you," the little fat boy said between mouthfuls of cake. He spoke in the same low voice that the woman had used moments before. "None of them can." My head filled with questions. Why was the first. Why can't I touch her? Where are we? Is she a ghost? Are you a ghost? The boy wandered off, continuing to smear his round face with frosting. "In this place, you are the ghost," said the cake-serving woman at the table. "I," she said, "do not, strictly speaking, exist. So yes, in a way similar but different to you, I am also a ghost. I simply borrow a portion of these people's appearances for a moment to speak to you in the only way you seem to be able to hear at present." "I'm the ghost? So she's alive?" "Calm down. Yes, she's alive. Here she always has been. So, in fact, is her cake-swilling little brother." She pointed at the retreating back of the heavy child. "And her grandmother," she said, pointing at the old woman with a tape player. "And her mother," she finished, gesturing to herself. "What about Frank?" I asked suspiciously. In this version of events, Frank has been afforded the opportunity to serve as the best father which he appears to have been capable of being. Here, he was accompanying the children down to the river last year, and was there to shove little Michael out of the way of the train. Michael lived, and Frank died. As for the place, you are in Boothbay Harbor, Maine. Mandy and her brother and mother moved here to live with her mother's family," she smiled. "They are quite happy here." Is this heaven?" I asked. "I thought you didn't believe in God anymore. Not scientifically verifiable and all that." She turned her nose up at me. "Well, I don't know. I guess lately I don't know about a whole lot of things," I replied, looking down. "Better. Not great, but better. No need to rush it, after all. Most of you has a goodish time to work it out." She looked back down approvingly. "I don't understand," I told her. "This is very confusing." "Obviously, you don't understand how any of this works. That's why I have to explain it to you. Well, as much as you can handle for now, anyway. We can't have any more of this business." She fussed at me and pinched one of her hands into the shape a person making shadow puppets might use to make a duck, and opened the duck's mouth. Sprout's wail cried piercingly from it for a moment before she clapped it shut. "I think we can all agree that such petulant outbursts are counterproductive, wouldn't you say?" she inquired, arching her eyebrows at me. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen," I stammered uncomfortably. "I believe you. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't be here trying to help you out. A fair number of you end up being quite useful and helpful once you get your head on straight," she explained. I looked around. There didn't appear to be anyone else to whom she could be speaking. "A fair number of who?" I asked. "Of you! Are you deaf as well as thick?" "They all keep saying you're gifted, but I'm not really seeing it," she dismissed. "In any case, if I didn't think you had at least a glimmer of the potential needed to make use of your talents, it would have been much easier to simply leave you in the recursion loop of your green valley. Safer, too." "Who are you? Who sent you? And how do I get home?" I pelted questions at her. With each of these questions, she mimed motions with her arms like she was deflecting bullets with her wrists, like I saw Wonder Woman do on TV. But we didn't have TVs. And suddenly I felt my vision went all blurry. My head hurt. Particularly, I felt a sharp pain above my left eye. "Easy now. Slow it down," she said, showing what seemed to be real concern. "Don't address paradox directly. That's disruptive. That's rule number 1. Don't make waves until you're certain you can handle the consequences. Now then, I, as I said, don't strictly speaking, exist. It's complicated. So I can't help you with the first one," she said, counting on one index finger. "Secondly, if you don't believe in any kind of God, then there's really nobody in charge to be sending functions like me anywhere. That would only lead you to the conclusion that I sent myself here, which is hilarious, as you will remember from point 1, that I don't, strictly speaking, exist. The third one, though, that's much more like it, but not for the reason you might think. Random chance guess or native instinct? Let's find out, she said, placing her hands on her hips in a fashion not unlike a schoolteacher. First question. When, exactly, did you leave home? She seemed to consider this an important question, so I pondered it for a moment. If I was sleeping, then I was still in my bed and could simply wake up and still be at home. But then I never knew if I was asleep or awake, or if I actually traveled to the Lucas's house. And if these events, I didn't know the word for it then, but the word I was looking for was discontinuities. These things have been happening to me all these years, then is it possible I've been sleeping for years? Which of the worlds I had imagined in my dreams was really home? I don't know, I replied. She mused with an air of disappointment. Less than ideal. Still, she brightened slightly, at least you view the matter with uncertainty, so we're not locked into anything. That'll have to do for now, and perhaps we can arrange for your memory to go for a jog. Okay, second question. What is the most important question you need to ask me? It seemed I had a hornet's nest full of buzzing questions whirling around inside my brain. Which one was most important? After a moment's consideration, though, I knew what I wanted to ask. If this version of events, as you say, allowed Mandy to live a perfect life, then can what I did to the Lucases be fixed? Bingo! Gold star, she said, and I felt a tingle of chimes as she tapped me on the forehead with one slender digit. No and yes. No, because your action was a direct personal action, you cannot undo it. Any attempt by you to do so would create a destructive paradox that would negate the very intention in the first place. That is, your desire to undo the thing cannot by itself achieve the reversal of the thing, because in doing so it removes the prime motivator for the desire. The desire disappears, the condition reverts, and so on. Intent, she said, is very important. However, yes. Though you don't know how yet, I can help you dampen that waveform. She growled with frustration. This is so much easier to explain to you after you fill your head with physics. But this you is a bit early. Okay, I can help you minimize the chances that the Lucases will encounter that outcome, she offered. So, we could make it so they get out okay? I asked. Exactly. Now, what did you notice while you were there? Well, they had fixed up the house, but the father did a terrible job. Everything was uneven and crooked. When I paused sheepishly. When I punched the house, the whole thing kind of collapsed, and the bricks all fell inward. When they tried to get out, they couldn't open the doors. All right. Now, in order to understand how to shift the probabilities, in order to make it unlikely that the bad event happened to them, you need a fundamental model. I think an allegorical construct would be best, given your age. One moment. Here we are. Take a seat, please, she said. I looked around and saw a tree stump behind me. I sat. She leaned forward again and touched my forehead again. The touch was chillingly cold, but not unpleasant. The instant she made contact, the world in front of my eyes disappeared and was replaced with the scene of the boat launch on the river on the north end of town, back home. I saw no one. Hello? I called out. I was still seated on the same tree stump from the look of it. The voice filled my head. It was no longer the voice of the woman, Mandy's mom. It was rich and melodious, but difficult to describe in any other terms. It seemed neither male nor female, or at least not in any traditional sense, other than by association with the last body I had seen it inhabit. I see you recognize the place. Consider this launching point to be the moment of birth for a person, she said, and as she did so, a woman appeared, carrying a tiny infant. Behold baby Moses. She sets him into the river of time, fearing to let him go, but fearing more not to, she said, as the woman placed the child into a tiny floating basket. She grabbed the wicker handle, which arched over the top, and hoisted it out past the sand and let go. As soon as the mother released her hand, the basket drifted out into the river's current and began to float downstream. "Follow and see," she said. I walked along the shore. The little basket bobbed in the currents, spinning gently. The river flows sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but the vessel floats always in one direction, downstream. "Sometimes there are obstacles," she said, and I saw a rock jutting out of the water. The basket floated gently up to it, bumped into it gently, and then the current spun it around one side. "Sometimes the obstacle is minor, and regardless of which way the outcome proceeds, the vessel soon returns to its former path." Of course, I knew this river well. I also knew that there was a dam ahead. An old disused canal followed alongside the river, from days long before my time, when commerce along the river was profitable. The old locks which fed the canal were still there, and a dam diverted a portion of the waterway down this channel. The water entered the canal through a spillway with a grate. If the basket went that way, the child would be hammered to death by the torrent, pinned against the grate. On the other hand, the portion of the river which went over the dam's top was dangerous as well. There were signs at both of the launch sites in town warning boaters of the danger. Canoes, mostly. The riverbed was too shallow in this area in most places to permit any deep hull to pass, which is why the canal had been built. If the basket became trapped in the eddies below the dam, it might roll there, tumbled by the current, until the next low water level reduced the flow to little more than a trickle, finally releasing the long-dead child from its watery talons to float on, perhaps washing the deceased passenger ashore somewhere further on, or perhaps straight out to sea. "The basket is in danger! What should I do?" I cried, panicking. The voice said nothing. "Hey!" I shouted. "There's stuff downstream that will destroy it. What do I do?" Still no response, but I felt like I was being watched, tested. Were these not the right questions? What am I allowed to do? "All things are possible, but not all things are expedient," came the answer immediately. Wait, wasn't that a scripture? Paul, wasn't it? No time to think about it. The current was picking up speed. I raced along the shore ahead of the little craft. Maybe I could wade out and grab it, but I didn't think so. This portion of the river above the dam was plenty deep enough. Small ships had been able to operate here because of the dam. If I entered here, I'd have to swim, and I'd be in just as much danger of getting caught in those eddies as the basket. But below the dam, I could wade out. It wasn't summer anymore. The turning of the leaves showed it still to be early fall, not spring thaw, so the water level should be low enough. But what if it veered toward the canal? I'd never be able to reach it in time. "I can't reach it in time!" I yelled. "Two are better than one. If they fall, the one will lift up his fellow," the voice intoned, and as I watched, the mother sailed up in her own larger basket, paddling across the stream and approaching the smaller basket, nudged it towards my shore. I ran ahead and reached the place where the dam stood. On this shore, stone steps had been carved out to allow cartage of canoes and such. You could disembark, carry your canoe or kayak past the dam, and continue on. Below the dam, the water was indeed shallow enough for me to walk out. I needed something to reach out with. Searching the shore, I found a long, straight wooden branch. I grabbed it and walked out into the stream. By the time I reached the point just below the dam, where the child was bobbing heedlessly forward, the water was up to my chest. The handle of the basket was still in the upright position. I positioned my branch, and the current threaded the handle over the top of the branch, whereupon I hoisted it like a crane and set it down safely past the eddies. I pulled my branch free, and the basket continued on its merry way. Behind me I heard a huge splash, and turned to see the mother, who struggled briefly to paddle her way clear, and then followed along. I noted that her boat was now also riding a bit lower in the water. I waded ashore and ran to catch up to the little boat. But when I caught up, the boat had gotten larger. The child within it had as well, for he was sitting up in the basket and had pushed the handle down and was eyeing his surroundings alertly. He seemed familiar, but I couldn't identify him. More boats joined him now. The mother, and along came a man whose face looked like the boy's, so I took him to be the father. And alongside the mother now, a second tiny basket. Ahead, they were approaching Royal Island, a large landmass in the middle of the river. The main current of the river passed on this side of the island, with only a small portion of the stream going the other way. The far side was quite shallow and slow-flowing, but navigable for crafts such as these. The little group was headed directly for the spot where the paths diverged. Paddling furiously to hold his position, an old man sat poised at the point of divergence, in a quite large basket. He yelled at the approaching group, at the father in particular. As they approached, he bellowed and would reach out of the water just long enough to point his finger at the father, then resume shouting. The little group seemed to drift towards the far side of the island, and the old geezer became furious, splashing the whole group relentlessly. The father paddled toward the main portion of the stream, and the geezer relented. The little family followed along, with the old man trailing them, still shouting occasionally. The current was moving rapidly, but I was young and fit, and I knew these woods like the back of my own hands, and was able to keep up easily. Royal Island is very large and very long. I followed the group for quite some time. Occasionally, the paths I had to take on land veered away from the water, but never very far. Each time I returned after such a split, all the boats seemed a little larger. On one such return, I noticed that the old man was gone. "Hey, where did the old man go?" I called out. "You know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away," the voice responded. "Oh," I said. There seemed little else to say. Meanwhile, the little group was struggling. The mother's boat had sunk very low in the water indeed, and the family were hanging on to it, while the father cupped his hands and bailed urgently, reaching into her boat and throwing little handfuls of water over his shoulder. The younger child was crying, while the older boy had taken to mimicking the expression of the old man. His expression was cold and stony, and now I recognized him. The older boy was Johnny Lucas. I ran as fast as I could downstream, past a bend where I would be able to see the water ahead, dreading what might be there. As I rounded the bend, just upstream of where Royal Island ended and the stream became one again, I saw a huge and hideous demon towering above the water. He stood on my shore, the eastern shore, so I was on his right. The skin on this side was glowing a painful-looking red, and when he turned his head to look upstream, the eyes were black, bottomless pits. The face, less the horns protruding from it, of course, was mine. "And you thought the rabbit was heavy-handed?" I muttered to myself. "Ah," countered the voice, sounding feminine again now, clearly using the voice of Mandy's mother for this scolding. "School is in session." The demon had balled up a fist and was pounding down into the riverbed on any piece of flotsam that drifted by. A great log from an uprooted tree drifted past, and the fist bashed it to splinters. "Oh, Johnny!" it bellowed. Had I sounded like that? The little group came around the bend in the river, and I saw that the mother's boat was riding higher in the water again. For how long, it was anyone's guess. And joining the little troop, a tiny basket next to her, that of the third boy, Sprout. I had been able to assist the one boy, but there was nothing I could do against such a titan, and I knew it. "Help! I can't stop that!" I wailed. The group floated under the demon's fist, and the fist came swinging down. "Stop!" said the voice, and the scene froze. "This is what the river has in store for the Lucas family because of your actions. What will you do?" "I've already apologized. I don't know what else I can do," I sobbed. "Your apology, while no doubt heartfelt, is useless to resolve the situation. What will you do?" she replied. "It's too late," I screamed back, tears beginning to fall. "It's too late to do anything about it now. If I had known who they were, what was coming way back upstream, I might have had some options, but now there's nothing for them to do but die." "Correct. This is what I wanted you to understand. In every situation, there comes a point of no return, where options become meaningless, and events play out as they are slated to do. In this case, at this moment in time, There is nothing, short of slaying you, that can be done to remedy the situation with which we are presented, she lectured. Then what's the point of all this? If I can't fix anything, why make me relive this? I howled, eerily reminiscent of the demon, if I am to be honest. The point, she continued patiently, is that you are not in a boat. I stood there goggling and repeated to myself, I am not in a boat. I took a step north, upstream. The hand of the demon raised up a few inches. I took 3 more, and the fish continued to rise, and the boats drifted slightly back up with me. I shrieked with joy and relief and began to run north, and in the water the scene reversed itself. I ran and ran until I had reached the waters north of Royal Island. The family were now frozen at the point where the old man was splashing them. The demon is north of the end of the island. If I could get the family to take the other fork, they would miss it entirely, I said. Came back the innocent reply, Miss who entirely? I sighed deeply. Miss me entirely. That's right. I'm not trying to rub your nose in this, there's no point. But I don't want you to try to absolve yourself through the deception of disassociation either. If you do that, the lesson won't be learned and taken to heart. The day would come again where you would be tested. The damage you might do then, with your gift honed to a skillfully wielded weapon, I do not wish to contemplate it. It is right that you can be forgiven for your wrong, but it is wrong anew to cast aside the lesson it teaches, she said. Is that in the Bible too? I asked. I'm not mocking. I really want to know. I added. As a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. Wisdom is supreme, therefore get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding, came the reply in the neutral voice. She then continued in the feminine voice. These things are gathered from various places, and say roughly the same thing. Does it suffice? Yes, thank you, I replied. You'll need time to act, so plan ahead, she said. I did. I went as far north as I could before reaching the point where I had already intervened. I didn't want to undo that portion and have to find another branch. I waded out to the middle, where the central channel was still deep enough that I had to swim, and swam across far enough that I could touch bottom again. The current had carried me part of the way toward the old man, and now I waded far enough on the western bank so I could move easily and made my way to him. I stood in front of him, and the family were drifting back down. Whenever I moved south, with the current, things seemed to move at their normal pace. Only when I reversed course did things track with me. This made it possible for me to get ahead. I stared into the man's face and shouted at him. Hey! Push off and leave those people alone! It doesn't work like that. He can't hear you from the model, she advised. What can I do? It's no better to capsize his boat than it is to let the family be killed, right? It is wrong to kill, to end the life senselessly as you did, even though it was not your intent. Yet, not all deaths are senseless. Sometimes death is the correct option. This should never be taken lightly and should always be the last resort. But come, you have done this part before. Step into the boat, she answered. I grabbed the edge of the boat and pulled myself up over the side and tumbled in, and tumbled out of this world into another. I was standing on a construction site. I was shouting orders at people, my crew presumably. I felt the same weird dissociation as I heard myself shouting and understood that this was the old man shouting, and because I was hearing it from inside his head, it sounded to me like my own voice. If the voices in your head don't sound like you, only then should you be concerned. Jason, get on up here. We've gotten a revision from the architect. They aren't willing to pay for the original columns, so we're going to show them the composite materials we already acquired and... Hey, are you even listening to me? The boy's father was approaching, but was looking off into the distance disinterestedly. The shout seemed to wake him from some reverie, and he looked at me. "Listen, Dad, I've been thinking." The old man was the boy's grandfather. I hadn't noticed a resemblance, but thinking back to the way Johnny had mimicked the expression on the old sourpuss's face, I could see it now. Suddenly, this thought was shoved rudely aside by another. "Oh, great. Here we go again. Little pansy wants to be an artist or a painter or some other horse crap. Well, not on my watch, boy. No son of mine is going to end up dancing around like some fruity hippie." Edwin McElroy had been drunk. There had been no internal dialogue, only a pervasive nausea and dizzy disorientation. Apparently, this was what it was like to step inside the head of a sober man. Then I felt an extremely odd sensation as my head was turned away from the eyes looking out onto the world, toward an internal screen, where what looked like an old-time flickering movie projector was playing some ancient footage. Memories! On the faded screen, an old bristled man with a severe crew cut was shouting into the face of the observer from a high angle, presumably Grandpa as a child. At first, there was no sound, and the footage was black and white. I felt a tickling sensation on my cheek and realized after a few moments that it was the feeling of spittle raining into my face. The footage panned down toward what the child was holding in its hand. It looked like a plastic horse. I thought it might be one of those Breyer horses, though I wasn't sure if they made them or not back then. Kevin's sister had a couple and loved them. But as I looked closer, even with the grainy footage, I could tell there were marks in this one. Little imperfections all over the surface. I knew that look from my own father's whittling. This horse had been carved. By the way he was cradling it, it seemed Grandpa himself had done it. It was a beautiful little horse, caught in mid-gallop, its mane flowing out behind it, two of the slender legs still attached to a piece of wooden earth to form a stand for it. The boy reached out one tiny finger and caressed the mane. Suddenly, the perspective changed as the child was picked up by the collar. The angry face loomed inches from the boy's eyes, and I could smell a miasma of onions, cigars, and aftershave that washed over me in a hot, humid cloud. The face suddenly launched away at terrific speed, and I didn't understand what had happened until a flash of actual color, red, flared in the film. The boy had been thrown across the room, possibly at a wall. The angry face walked toward the cowering boy, leaned in, and snatched the carved animal out of his hand. Very faintly, I could hear, almost buried under some hissing static, the sound of terrible sobbing, crackling like an old vinyl record. The view panned up now, and I could see the angry man holding the horse in one hand and waving at it with the other. With each flourish of his empty hand, I was assaulted by a bright flash of the same face in close-up again, and this time there were sounds, blasting quadraphonic bursts of noise, shouting, "Sissy! Pansy! Nancy boy!" And then the man, it seemed obvious that this was Grandpa's own father, threw the beautiful carved figurine to the ground and began stomping it repeatedly with one foot. The view seemed now like a slow-motion film, with the detail of the new image wrought to the beloved object with each blow detailed. Legs broken, neck cracked, decapitated, streaming tail snapped off, body broken in half. The father stormed away, and that faint audio of the sobbing could be heard again. The boy picked up the pieces, and the images washed out as his eyes filled with tears. My own eyes were filled as well. Grandpa had had his spirit broken, and so had been trained to do the same to his son. Just as had happened with Edwin in the glade, I suddenly knew what I had to do, and no one would have to die today. The memory film had ended, and I looked forward out of the eyes again as my voice shouted, "Yeah, what is it now?" What I did next is best explained by saying I thought out loud. I was speaking, but I wasn't using the body's mouth, and unlike the things I had thought to myself, Grandpa could hear this in his head. And just like me, it sounded to him like himself. The difference, of course, was that he had no frame of reference to cause him to believe that it was anything but this. It was wrong what Dad did to me. It was wrong and horrible, and nowadays they'd throw a guy in jail for treating a kid like that. Worst of all, it ruined a part of me that was worth saving. I loved that horse. And I could hear an echo rising in Grandpa's head. Faint at first, but rising out of that forgotten tomb where the thought had been laid to rest long ago. I love that horse. The film projector crackled to life again behind me, and in my peripheral vision, I could see the flashes of light as the insult reel began again. Sissy! Pet! I reached out with my mind, with an invisible hand, and imagined an extension cord snaking out from the projector and tugged gently on it. It burbled as the film ground to a halt and the image blacked out. I shouted, "Those memories can't hurt me anymore. I love that horse, and I should love my boy enough not to break him the same way my old man broke me." The echoes continued to grow. Can't hurt me. Love that horse. Love my boy. My old man. And then, a thought from Grandpa that wasn't one of my echoes. Old man broke my heart. And suddenly, the view out the portholes was fogging up just like the newsreel had. Grandpa was crying. And from the look on Jason's face, it was the first time in a long time, perhaps the first time he had ever seen this. I heard myself saying, "I'm sorry, Jason. I've been a fool. If you want to study art rather than follow in my footsteps in the family business, I don't have any right to stand in your way. You deserve to make your own choices and be your own man." Jason's jaw dropped, aghast, but he recovered quickly. "Dad, I'm not trying to abandon the family business. I never was. I just think that as an architect, I could learn how it all works, not just be some hammer jockey. Dad, we take orders from architects all the time. Isn't it time a Lucas got to give the orders?" All around me, the dark space I was in lit up, as though dozens of roller blinds suddenly scrolled upward, allowing daylight to pour in. I heard one last joyful thought as I tumbled out of his head. "Architect? Jumpin' Jesus, how did I miss that? I must have been..." And that was the last I heard, as I tumbled back into the river with a splash. I stood up and found the water here was only a foot deep. The family, Grandpa and all, were all floating away down the westward side of Royal Island. They would rejoin the stream, south of my interference, and they would live. Their lives might be different than they had been. There were no guarantees of happiness, but they wouldn't die at my hand at least. And they were healthier now, in my opinion, than they had been when I found them. My own tears of relief were flowing as I watched them disappear around the bend in the river, and then it too was gone, as Mandy's mother was pulling her finger away from my forehead. The spot where she had been touching me was so warm, it felt like it should have been glowing a dull red. "Well done," she said softly. "Very well done indeed. So you see, your area of influence extends from the moment of your birth to the moment of your death. You learn that much from that evil-looking contraption you've left parked outside of the Green Valley recursion. An excellent and eminently suitable final resting place for it, if I may say so. Every person has their own river, their own continuity, if you will, a thread that the ancients called the thread of life. Some believe that this thread was managed, for lack of a better term, by the three fates. In a way, this is the gift you have received, within the confines of parallel courses in other people's lives to your own timeline." She looked at me solemnly. "As you have learned, it is an awesome responsibility. You are not compelled to use it by any will but your own, but you are admonished that if you do use it, you do so wisely. As such, you required this training to make it possible for you to do so, which you passed wonderfully. As a result, in keeping with tradition, I am authorized to allow you 3 reckless questions. No judgment or ridicule for anything you might ask, so let 'em rip." "What about the blood?" "Illusion, brought about by coincidence, combined with your lack of knowledge. Your talents were awakened by heightened emotional states, not by ingesting your own cells and salt water. If you had been slapped with a fish each time it happened, you might have come up with some equally implausible fish theory. all entirely constructs of your own imagination. You then created reinforcing illusions, including photosensitivity. I suspect it came from vampire movies. Did you not yourself think of vampires the first time you saw Mandy's house on Spring Street? I had. And what about touching, needing physical contact? Possibly there is some connection to your vampire fixation. I do seem to recall something in Nosferatu lore about needing to be invited in the first time or some such piffle. Real monsters do not ask permission to do horrible things. That is a fundamental component of what makes them monsters. Anything else? I had an inspiration. You said that you do not, strictly speaking, exist. Have you ever, or will you ever, exist? She smiled. Clever boy. I guess there's some genius in there after all. But I can't answer that for you, I'm afraid. I myself am hopeful, but I simply don't know. Probabilities are in flux. So, since I can't answer, as compensation, you get one more question. Mandy, I sighed. That's not a question, she observed tartly. She never met me because her timeline diverged from mine as a result of the indirect consequences of a change I made. But those consequences did not lead her to where she is now. How did she get here? You know, she said, taking a deep breath, those really are very good questions. But I can't answer that one either. And I'm not permitted to tell you why, at least not today. Sorry. Come on, give me a question I can answer. She's living a perfect life now. Even if I could bring her back, it would be wrong to do it, because the only way she could be with me would be to return to living with Frank. And she deserves better than that, I said, as I watched her marching around the decreasing cluster of chairs to Pop Goes the Weasel underneath her brightly colored birthday hat. Well, she said, for what it's worth, Voltaire had it wrong. There is no best of all possible worlds. You might say, despise rats. No perfect world could exist where you have to share it with a rat. Person B might have been a lonely research assistant who never formed friendships with anyone but the test subjects in his cages. His perfect world might necessitate that talking to rats be accepted in every aspect of human civilization, so that his own myopic preference would not cause him to be ostracized. As a result, these two perfect world scenarios are mutually exclusive. Either one negates the other. But I'm off the point. You are correct. This is the best outcome for her, and I appreciate that you are selfless enough to see it and respect it. But it's still not a question. Is there any way I can say goodbye? That, she answered with a smile, I think we can manage. The room was dark, save for a nightlight on one wall. Mandy had gotten in one of the beds, her little brother in the other. Michael was fast asleep, his sugar crush having laid him low early. Her mother tucked her in, laid her index finger to her lips and kissed it, and then pressed it to the center of Mandy's forehead. I've established the connection. She will remain in your construct model until she drops into deep sleep. Christina, or the function which was borrowing her, whispered. When you break your connection with her, the connection to this place will break as well, and you will return to the world as you knew it when you couldn't sleep. With your new changes, of course. I closed my eyes and visualized the river. I was sitting on a log that had been made into a bench back on the eastern bank of the river. Sitting next to me, Mandy sat with her eyes closed. Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight, she chanted. Wish I may, wish I might, have the wish I wish tonight. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I wish I could see my knight in shining armor one more time. She opened her eyes and then looked around. When she saw me, she clapped her hands to her mouth and gasped. You came! You came! I smiled at her, and she leaned over and gave me a big hug. When she let go, I saw something curious and wonderful. She hugged me like she might have hugged a favorite giant stuffed animal. There was no mischief dancing in those eyes, only deep happiness. It hadn't occurred to me before that what I thought was alluring had actually been damage that had been done to her. I wondered for a moment how much of the rest of my mind might be misshapen in some way, how something which seemed normal to me might be unsightly or horrible to someone else. But I put these thoughts away. Time was precious. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," I said. "Oh, I am. I dreamed I was in a dark and scary place, and bad people were all around, and you came in and saved me. But then you disappeared, and I thought I'd never see you again," she said, pouting this last. "But here you are," she exclaimed, and her bright smile returned. "I can't stay, Mandy," I said. "I'll have to go. But it makes me very happy to see you safe." "Yeah, I know," she replied, some of the smile fading, but only a portion. "You have other people to save," she said, yawning. "Mom told me. You have to go and save some people, and then you have to fight the big dragon before he hurts everybody," she continued, blinking. "Gosh, I'm so tired. I don't know why I'm so tired." "Your mom told you this?" "Yeah, well, no. It wasn't my mom, but it was. She kissed me good night with her finger and then told me in my head that I could give you as many answers as I could remember before I fell asleep. And then she told me that the dragon was coming, but not to be afraid because we were safe here. She said you would fight the dragon and stop it so it couldn't get to us or anybody else," she mumbled. Her eyes were closed again, with sleep rather than wishes this time. "She said you forgot one important question, but all's fair is love in war. In love, not is. So tired," she breathed out with another big yawn. "What did I forget, Mandy?" "She said," she muttered, "you forgot to ask where your magic sword came from." "My sword?" "Yeah. You're going to use it to fight the dragon, and it has magic words on it. You know, your magic sword. She thought you forgot to ask where it came from, but I told her that was silly. Everybody knows where knights get their swords." "Where? Mandy, where does it come from?" "From the king, of course." And her smile widened, and it lit up her whole face. She began to fade. I could see the riverbank right through her. The last thing to fade was that beaming smile. Then the river began to fade as well. I awoke in a hospital bed to the sound of beeping machines. It was the night of October 9th, 1982. The bedside clock read 10:04 p.m. I had been asleep for 27 days. In my right hand lay a wooden sword. Upon closer inspection, it appeared the sword had been whittled out of the plank of wood I had been keeping a secret since 1977. Once again, a new word had been added to it. The full text now read, "Lost eyes, find lies, free roam."